Sarah Yu is a renowned EFL author, teacher, trainer, teacher, and examiner. And good morning, Sarah. I see you. Can you hear me?
Morning. How are you?
Great. I'm very well. Okay, so just to inform everybody, well, I'm going to be leaving shortly. I'm going to be in the background. So if you need anything, Sarah, I'll be here for you. But everybody that's watching, we will have a question and answer section at the end of the talk. So if you have some questions, jot them down. And when we start the question and answer section at the end, this will be a perfect time for you to ask Sarah or myself any questions you may have about today's presentation or anything in general. So without further ado, please welcome Sarah.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm going to talk about the MSU-CELC today. There have been some revisions made that I'm going to update you on, but I also want to give you a general introduction to the exam because the fact that it's called Michigan State University Examination does confuse a lot of people. So we know about the HAU, Hellenic American Union examinations, which are also called Michigan, and they've been around for a long, long time. MSU is another qualification that's administered by Dewey College and Anatolia, which is from Michigan State University. It's a separate university from the University of Michigan. Both of them are in Michigan. Both of them are accredited, respected universities, but this is a different exam. Okay. Of course, it's fully recognized by ASEP in Greece. Its B2, C2 levels are aligned with the Common European Framework, and it is generally an internationally recognized qualification. Although, as I said in my previous webinar, that depends on who you're applying to, if it's a college or for employment. But no matter what, always having any B2, C2 qualifications is a plus. Okay, so let's go. There's the cover of my book. A general description of the exam. This examination has 4 parts: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. Now, of course, there's also grammar, but they include grammar in the writing section, all right? So basically, they give each section, it's worth 25% of the mark, regardless of the number of points that are in. Like, for example, speaking is, listening maybe 30 items, but they average it to a mark out of 25. Pass is 60% as an average, so there's no requirement to pass every section. And the total length is 2 hours and 35 minutes. That's without the speaking, and that's done all together on one day, usually on a Saturday, in December or in June, or it might be end of November, end of May. Let's move on. So the writing ability. Now, the writing ability has a 35-minute time limit, which can be challenging for students. It's not uncommon. Other exams have 30 minutes, but other exams have 45. I think that this does cause some difficulty to students, which is why they need a lot of training to fulfill the 35-minute time limit. The only way they can do it, okay, first of all, I strongly advise that on the day of the exam, and generally speaking, they have a watch with like a proper face on it so that they can get a sense of the time passing. They need to feel what 35 minutes is without constantly referring to time. The examiners on the day will put up 5 more minutes or 15 more minutes, but this isn't as helpful if you haven't practiced what 35 minutes is. You have 2 prompts. They are expressing opinions, usually. They have been in the past something like, what would you do if? But in any event, they always require a student to give an opinion about something. Now, although pros cons are a very popular format, MSU clearly states that they only want one side of the argument. So in other words, get your students to practice choosing a side and only supporting that. Now, this actually can be more challenging because they need to come up with even more material or more arguments or more examples for that one side. I mean, as you can imagine, if you're doing pros and cons, you only need, I don't know, let's say it's approximately 300 words, maybe less. So you only need 100 or 80 words for each side, introduction, conclusion, and you fulfill the task. There's no word count, by the way. They just say about a page. Make sure it's at least 4 paragraphs. They say that 3 are acceptable, like introduction, body, conclusion, but I really recommend 4. They should have 2 main points in their body. So going back to the one side thing. So it can be challenging because students might not be able to come up with so much information and material to support one side of the argument only. In this case, I do suggest that they could mention, if they're really at a loss for more arguments, they could suggest, I do suggest they could put in one side as okay, so let's say they're arguing in favor of history being taught at schools. Let's just take a classic subject or certain subjects being taught at schools. So they come up with history is very important. It gives us a sense of identity, a sense of who we are, etc. And then the next paragraph will say history is also important because in understanding our own culture, and then they kind of get lost and they don't know what to say. So instead of that second paragraph, they can put, of course, it is true that some students are not keen on history and feel that they would be better served doing another subject and being able to choose their subject. And then immediately turn it back. But in my opinion, this doesn't mean that history should not be compulsory, at least to a certain level. So I hope you understand what I mean. You can kind of introduce the other side as long as it's very clear that you're supporting one side. And I would only do that in order to enrich my essay. If I have enough points to support my opinion, then only choose one side. All right. So they should make it clear in their introduction which side or what their opinion is. They should develop two major points, but maybe more. Now remember, it's always important for them to use examples and reasons. And they say it in the topic itself, they stress that. They also do that in the speaking. Always have your students ask why. If they just put points down that they believe in, it ends up just being a list of points, right? So should subjects be compulsory or should high school students choose? They should be compulsory because students don't always make the best choices. Moreover, they get lazy and they would only choose blah, blah. In addition, blah, blah, blah. It just sounds like a list of points, and this doesn't make for good writing. So sometimes what they will find is some of their points actually support each other, in which case they should combine them, right? And here is my most important piece of advice. At least that's what I stressed to my students. You may think that 35 minutes does not give you enough time to plan your essay. I completely disagree. You can spare 5 of those 35 minutes to planning because then everything will go more smoothly. And this especially applies to the proficiency level where you want to write even more words in the same time limit. But especially at the B2 level, they need to have learned planning skills because in planning, they will see that some of their points, first of all, support each other and can be grouped together to develop one richer main point, all right? So for example, with the should courses be compulsory one of the points could be students always don't make the best choices, and some students will only choose things like gym and computer science. Those two are actually the same point. So if they put them together, one would support another. Whereas if they were just writing off the top of their head, they will often separate those points and then just make a list, okay? Planning is essential, but it's a skill. It's a strategy. It's not like, oh, I never planned, it doesn't work for me. I don't know how to plan it. I can't do it. I've heard every excuse under the sun. In order to teach your students to plan, your first essays have to be strong and planned together, all right? And then send them home to write the essays. At least help guide them through the planning process and explain to them planning can be just, a really rough list and 1 word for each point. It's also a very good time for them to write down words that they remember. It's like, oh yeah, I want to use ultimately. So in the conclusion part of their plan, they write down ultimately, because often when they're writing it itself, it slips their mind, right? So in the planning stage, it's also where they give organization. So it's like which goes in the first paragraph, which goes in the second. And here's another, it's a safety net, because sometimes you look at 2 topics and you say, okay, because you shouldn't waste too much time choosing them, right? But there are very few, I hope, cases in which when they start to write the plan, within the first minute, they're like, I actually have nothing to say about it. I mean, I like the topic, it sounded interesting, but I don't know what to say about it. And so they can immediately switch to the second topic and then see if they can do that better. They need to have decided within those first 5 minutes what they're going to write about. But imagine if they hadn't planned, they just started writing, and in like 15 minutes through, they're like, I have nothing more to say. I've seen this happen as an examiner, right? I've seen that horrified blank look. I've seen students freeze, and they just don't know what to do. So please, please stress to all of your students always the importance of planning. Now, the other very important thing to do for the writing for the 35-minute time limit is make sure that it's a piece of advice I've given before, that you do in-class work. It's another thing when they're at home and you tell them to put a timer, their phone's going to ring, their mother's going to come in, they're going to want to get a glass of water. It's not the same thing. They need to be in a situation under the conditions of the examination where they have the 35-minute time limit. Very important. 2 topics they have never seen and have not thought about. Throw them into the deep water. All right. So, and watch them. And the first time that you do it, you can say, all right, you should be planning right now. Okay, planning should be over by now. All right. And then have them write it. They should do this a few times so that they get used to the time limit and they understand what 35 minutes means. So I always suggest that you do it about a month in to the year, about 3 months in around midterm, like maybe Christmas time, and then about 2 or 3 weeks before they sit. And the reason for this is that just in case they do badly 2 or 3 weeks before they sit, they have a chance to make up for it. You don't want them going into the exam having done a really bad in-class essay, right? That psychologically that would be, very destructive. So in-class is very important. If you have the time, if you work at a school, try to set up a writing workshop on a weekend day so that they just come in, write, and leave again, right? In the MSU, they use pencil, not pen, so teach them to erase mistakes quickly and just write again. Greek students tend to be obsessed with the appearance of their work. So apart from being legible, American examiners who are marking their writing have no qualms about how beautiful it looks, right? Make sure they know about paragraphing, either indentation or leaving a space in between each paragraph. I prefer the space. It gives it as an examiner, it makes it easier to read, but that's up to the student. All right. Anything else about the writing? They should try their best to leave 3 to 4 minutes at the end to check it over. This is the time when they should be finding the careless mistakes that they have made. Do not tell them check to see if you have made mistakes. Tell them to go over and look for the careless mistakes that they make. Because if your student should fail the writing, he or she will fail by 5%. That's usually what happens. That 5% are those careless mistakes, all right? Another piece of advice is about how to start the essay. Rephrase the prompt, not using the words in the prompt. It's so important. You'll always see in the benchmarks that are on their website, examiners commenting that students rephrase the prompt successfully using their own words. So, and that's a good way, especially for weaker students, just rephrase the prompt, right? Because often students are stuck like, how do I start? How do I start? How do I start? No, don't waste time there. You don't have time to waste. Just go. So about 2 sentences, rephrase the prompt, express your opinion, and then go using your plan, right? Another important thing is for them to always refer to the topic, like to have it So let me just show you what I mean. So this could be their writing paper, let's say it's lined, and above it, the topic. So as they're writing, they're always looking back to the topic. Even me as an examiner, if I'm writing a model essay for a book or something, I need to keep looking at the topic to make sure that I am aligned with it, that I'm addressing every point of it. Okay. And make sure that you teach them the correct register. The register is always formal. There's no email or something informal here. Now, the funny thing about the writing ability page is that the writing, it's not really funny, but you know what I mean, is worth 80% of that mark. The grammar, those 30 multiple choice questions, which used to be 40, it's been cut down, are only worth 20% of the entire grade. So obviously writing is the key. Now, unlike the previous seminar with the ESB, once the writing is done, the examiner collects it, it's put into an envelope and it's sealed. So nothing can, it can't be looked at again. Okay, I think that that's all I have to say about writing. Let's move on to the grammar section. So, in the grammar section, it's pretty classic. It's multiple choice, it's all of the standard grammar issues like, passive voice, verb tense, some prepositional phrases, some syntax. Syntax has become very popular, for them to get the general word order within a sentence so that it would make sense. They have 20 minutes. So 20 minutes for 30 questions means less than a minute a question. So they need to also have practiced that under examination conditions so that they see that they can go fast. But generally students do not have a problem with that. They read the question quickly, they know the right answer, or they have understood to eliminate the wrong answers. In my last video, I talked about some strategies of dealing with multiple choice. Make sure they don't look at patterns, all right? There could be 5 Ds in a row. Don't change your 5th one because it's not another D. Don't change that one. It could be the D. And there could be 5 Ds, right? And perhaps 2 of the Ds you've put above are wrong, and now you're changing the one that should be D into something else. Tell them not just to ignore patterns, all right? And always to take a guess. Always take a guess. Sometimes they are not certain. They leave it blank. No. I would suggest that at that point they take a guess before they go on. And what they can do is they can circle that item on their test booklet, which is not evaluated, and go back if they have time. Here's something I've seen happen on several occasions during the exam. They're not sure of a question. They leave it blank. But what do? They answer the next question in the wrong gap. So at the time, because no time is given to transfer answers from one paper to the other. For example, they can't circle the right answer on the test booklet with the intention of coloring them all in at the end. They don't have time. They're not given any time for that at all. All right. So what happens is they've answered all of them incorrectly, and they suddenly need to erase 10 questions and put them in to the question above. Now, this is a nightmare for many reasons. It will freak them out psychologically, right? Secondly, as you know, these are marked by computers. If they pick up traces of 2 answers, 2 bubbles being circled, so if they're not erased properly, it makes the answer null and void. So they need to erase it completely, completely. Just answer each question. What I suggest that they do is they take the test booklet, and every time they answer that question, they fill in the bubble, move it down to the next one. Move it down to the next one. Keep going like that. All right. You should practice this a few times because especially at the B2 level, most of your kids have never sat this type of examination. They're not familiar with the concept that the whole paper, their whole answer sheet is scanned in, a fraction of a second. The computer doesn't distinguish between which circle was darker or there was a remnant. So you need to go over and make sure, print. We have sample answer sheets, but you can find them online. You can find them, you can even find templates, generally speaking. Teach them to, fill in the circle, first of all, not go out. This is hard for some kids. They're not used to it because they're small circles, all right? Make sure they have 3 or 4 sharp pencils with them on the day of the exam. Pencils are not provided. And with the new COVID reality, we as examiners are not allowed to give or take anything from the candidates. It's kind of scary. It was a very odd examination period the last time, oral exams with a mask and etc. So you have to make all of your students very independent, that they're well stocked on pencils, erasers with very fine points. They should be soft leaded pencils, not mechanical ones, etc. All right. And don't forget the watch. So grammar should be something straightforward. They should zip through it. They should be fine if they're not sure. Make sure they eliminate the answers that they probably think are wrong. All right. And then the common techniques of multiple choice. The listening ability. Now, listening is somewhat challenging to many students. It tends to be the section they do less well on, which is a bit odd because when they first get acquainted with it, especially if they're used to Cambridge formats, they're like, oh, this is easy. Not really. All right. And something happens on the day of the examinations. Students are nervous, they're excited, and often they're not focused. So, especially for the first 2 or 3 dialogues, they go by and they're like, I didn't get it, I didn't hear it, but they don't get to hear it again. So please advise your students to sit down, concentrate, like meditate, I don't know. It's just them and their test paper and the voices that they're hearing. They should not look at their classmates. What I often get is, if I see this as an examiner, and it's so frustrating. So there's a difficult dialogue. Maybe it was too short. Kids didn't expect it and they missed the answer. And so they're all shocked. And you know what they do? They're like, what was that? And they're looking at they're at the other candidates for confirmation of the fact that listening was really, really difficult. Yes, it was. Okay. Doing this makes you lose the 15 seconds you have to be reading the next question. It helps nobody. So tell them, please, to concentrate and ignore everybody and to be ready from the word go. There's a long introduction, welcome to the MSU-CELC. Well, you have been given, and it's very long. So, and then they give you an example question. So it gives them a lot of time to get into the whole environment that I am doing a listening test. I am concentrating, because what I do find is that in many cases, my students score lower in the test than they did in class. So that can only be accounted for by the fact that they were more nervous and they were not concentrating. So get them to concentrate, all right? They do, part 3 is heard twice, but part 1 and 2, that's it. You hear it and then it's over. Okay. So about the listening, there's a new change now where they start with a little introduction for each question that says, here is the situation. Jane and Mike are walking to their bicycles and they are talking about blah, 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 blah. To be honest, the introductions don't give a lot of insight into what is going to be said. That's not the point of them. The point of them, first of all, is to ease the student into a completely different subject, right? And to help them, leave the previous question and get into the mentality of the new one. So it's a friendly thing that they've done, right? And the few seconds that they have in between questions should definitely be spent reading over the questions and the alternatives so that they're familiar with them. They can underline keywords as they read in the test booklet. They can write anything they want on the test booklet. So even when they're listening to the here is the situation, they can still be doing that, all right? Make sure that they understand when it's over, just leave it. The more time they spend torturing themselves over what the right answer is, the more time they steal from preparing for the next question. So these have to be practiced in class, all right? Also to always guess an answer. Do not leave it for later. What on earth will you remember? And again, in this section, no time is given to transfer your answers. So there's no point. Just tell them to take their best guess. Something I want to mention about the MSU multiple choice questions, which is specific to MSU, I would say, although I'm seeing a tendency for other examinations to follow suit. The distractors, and by distractors I mean the wrong answers, are usually things that are not mentioned in the dialogue, and this also goes for the reading or in the passage, but they're very, very plausible. So what used to be the case is that in classic multiple choice questions, the other options would be something that was said, but it's not right in degree, it's not answering the question, but it would pick up on something that was said or written in terms of the passages. In MSU, it tends to be something that makes absolute perfect sense, but it's wrong. It was never mentioned, it was never referred to. All right. So kids cannot use their common sense by reading the question and going, oh, that sounds like a good answer. Sounds like the best answer. Yeah, no, don't let them do that. All right. Of course, there's rephrasing. So in one of the tricks they don't use, which is common in other exams, is that they pick up words that were said in the listening, and then that's always the wrong answer. So they'll use a catchphrase, and then the kids go, oh, I heard that catchphrase, and that's the catchphrase, so that must be the right answer. So we train kids to avoid that. That doesn't happen, I think almost, I've never seen that at all in MSU examinations. So they don't have to be wary of that particular trick. In the part 2, they're longer dialogues, but along the same lines, just, more questions. They're 2 to 4 questions instead of 1 for each longer dialogue. Again, heard once. So this is probably, a lot of my kids say that this is the most challenging one because they need to remember. I mean, they're not really, really long, but they need to remember what was said, and they only have to hear it once. So they need to, all the questions are always in the order that they're spoken, of course. That would really be unfair if they weren't. And they need to, answer it at that time. So it's fast. They hear the situation, they should use it to really understand what the dialogue is about. Try to imagine that they actually see those people talking, and then just concentrate on what they're saying and answer and choose the right answer there and then. There's no going back on that one. Use the time before. They give you 15 seconds plus to read over the questions. They need to use that time because I often see kids in that break just waiting, daydreaming. No. Okay. And again, they can underline keywords within the question and the answers so that they're listening for something. Okay. The extended discourse, the third section of the listening, has 2 passages. One is a dialogue and one is a speech, a monologue, all right? Again, you have quite a long time to read over the question, so make sure that you tell your students to do so. Since you hear it twice, I strongly suggest that the first time they listen for gist, all right? Obviously, since you're going to hear them twice, they're slightly more complicated than the ones that you only hear once. So they need to have an idea of what's being said, what the point is, what the tone is. Is there any admiration, sarcasm, pleading, process of elimination, guess the best answer, etc., for multiple choice. Okay, so for listening, I think the biggest changes were made here. Besides cutting down the number of questions from 40 to 30, we have the here's the situations, introductions, and more importantly, the topic matter has become more relevant to a younger audience. So where in the past, most of the dialogues would be in professional situations or a customer at a grocery store or something like that, now it more tends to be a child talking to a parent, students talking to each other, things more relevant to a younger audience. So this is very, very helpful this is a very positive change for your students. It's something that they can relate to, something easier to understand for them, and also more interesting. In general, the whole examination has been updated in this way to address a younger audience. All right, fewer questions, a younger audience, and the introductions. That would be the main changes that I would say happened. All right, so that's all about listening. If you have any questions, please jot them down and save them for the end of the webinar. That's the breakdown of the 3 sections. So this is very wide range, 5 to 10 short conversations. Could be 5, could be 10, it's usually 7 or 8. 2 to 4 mid-size, it's usually 3. 2 to 4 questions, here it could be 2, 3, or 4. 2 long discourses, 6 to 8 questions. All right, so that's the main part. Now, the reading section. So the reading section has 4 passages, as it did in the past. They give 2 visual images. So there are, it could just be, I don't know, like a vector, like a, what do we call those, clip art type thing, or it could be a photograph. I don't think it adds to comprehension unless your student is really weak and has no idea what it's about. It makes the exam seem happier or more approachable. Anyhow, there's now 2 images for each passage, 7 to 8 multiple questions for each passage. Previously there were 10, with a total of 30. They haven't really officially announced this, but the length has been shortened. So the students will have more time to read them. There's 4 options for each question. In multiple choice, there were 3. In the listening, sorry, there were 3. Again, we have the here's the situation. So I noticed in their samples there was a blog post that seems to be more common, which in the past there wasn't. Emails. It's generally speaking more fluid, friendlier, more cheerful. It's more geared towards a younger audience. Okay. Look, for the reading, the time allotted can be challenging, right? You need to have your students practice this as well. Now, in class, I don't find it to be so valuable because, you know, you're going to need a lot of time for it. It's 50 minutes, 50. So using up 50 minutes of in-class time where you could be teaching something, no. But I would advise them strongly to have plenty of practice at home doing those 4 passages within 50 minutes, right? So 50 minutes means about 12 minutes for each passage. Think about that. That's 12 minutes to read, skim and scan, and answer 7 to 8 questions. That's not a lot of time, even though the passages are shorter and I would say simpler in some way, at least more interesting. 7 to 8 minutes per passage needs practice, all right? And I would even suggest that they try to do it under the time limit. Now here, this is an exercise you could do in class. Give them 1 passage to do in 7 minutes and see how far they get, so that you get an indication of how, you know, how far along they are in being able to do the whole examination. Other tips, they need to learn to skim and scan. They should not get stuck on unfamiliar words. They should try to guess for all situations, and remember that the distractors are often irrelevant answers. They're not even in the text. They just make a whole lot of sense as an answer to the actual question. All right. So it's pretty straightforward. They need to just deal with the speed of the whole thing. All right. I think that's the biggest hurdle for many of the students. Just getting through 4 passages in 50 minutes. All right. Sorry, I'm going backwards. Before I go to the speaking ability, I think you may have noticed the lack of vocabulary multiple choice or other types of use of English exercises. There are none. Vocabulary in the MSU at both levels is tested through the passages. There are usually 1 or 2 vocabulary questions about each passage. So what does this word mean? And this is friendlier because students can use context to support them. I am strongly against having students memorize lists and lists of vocabulary, you know, which they will promptly forget the day after the examination. It's far better to have them learn words within context, use them in their writing, recognize them in their reading, and assimilate them into their I'm glancing over the questions, which I shouldn't because they look interesting and I need to concentrate on this, and I will address them at the end. Yes, sorry, what was I saying? Yeah, there are no vocabulary type questions that are just vocabulary per se. So have your kids practice reading and getting the general gist of what's being said and understanding through context. All right, I find this a much friendlier and more realistic way to do vocabulary. The speaking. All right, MSU is known for its very friendly examiners. You have two examiners. One is the examiner, the other is the interlocutor. So mostly one of them speaks to you. There used to be 6 questions, now there's 5. So that's another change that they've made. One of the descriptions has been dropped. And to be honest, I found that description was perhaps the hardest question for students. So I find this a very positive change. Description would be a question like, describe your bedroom and how it's set up. These types of questions, which a native speaker would find easier for students of EFL, they find more challenging. Because they say, I have a bed, I have a closet, I have a desk, then they get stuck. So practice description questions and always train your kids to think about things that are less concrete. So my bed is a little bit small. It's only a single bed. And when I was younger, I used to find it was really big, but now I feel like there's not enough space for me. So I've asked my mother to get me a slightly bigger bed, but it's still very comfortable. As far as my desk is concerned, it's brand new and it's large. It's across from my bed. And I really like it because it's very professional and it gets me in the mood to work, something like that. They should always refer to feelings, to desires, to other points. Otherwise, it's just a desk. There's not a lot we can say about it, right? There are 2 narrations. So a narration is a mini story. They also need practice in this. And, storytelling is a skill that is really valuable to teach, regardless of whether they're going to be using it for example, in the FCE and the ESB, stories are topics that they need to learn how to write. But storytelling as a skill, whether it's oral or written, is really important, right? Have the introduction, when, all the question words, who, why, where, and then something happens, and something unexpected happens, and then kind of what the moral of the story was, if they can, something they learned, all right? This needs practice, and this can be done also through writing practice. I love storytelling and story writing. I think it's an incredibly valuable skill. It helps us to communicate better. It helps us to shape our own thoughts better. There's so much we can learn from our own life experiences, and putting them into a story context helps us to understand, oh, that's what I learned from that, right? Whatever the situation was, there's always something that we can gain from analyzing and going back. So one of my favorite things is storytelling, as I said, and I would strongly encourage your kids to get practice telling and writing stories, and understanding that a story is not, I got up, I went to school, I had a test, I went home, I had dinner, the end, not a story, all right? Explain to them the linear thing and the climax coming down and the twist. It's always nice to have something unexpected, all right? Now, the 2 supported opinions are basically 2 mini essays or 2 mini discursives. So they're classic topics. So again, let's go back to the should school subjects be optional or compulsory. Have them approach them like mini compositions. Now, the examiners stress, as they did in the writing rubrics, their answers must be supported by reasons, illustrations, explanations. All right. So always have your student asking why, even for the other questions, why? So on the one, okay, they can use some of those on the one hand if it helps them, all right? They sound a bit artificial. Even in writing, they sound artificial. But sometimes, especially when they're under stress, it will help them structure an answer. So yeah, this is a topic that I've thought about a lot because there are subjects at school I don't like. Mini introduction. On the one hand, I understand that we need to be learning some subjects because, like math or language or whatever, because they're vital for our future. But personally, I think that we learn some subjects at too high a level. And okay, I'm not talking like a B2 student, but you get the gist. And that we need to have more choice, especially in the last 2 years of high school or at high school level, as to what subjects we want to take. Because I don't like studying algebra, for example, and I plan to be a painter, an artist. So I don't really see the point of me learning something at such a high level. Something like that. You have to make it personal. Tell them to talk about themselves in the writing as well. All right. So the advice that you give for the two supported opinions, a lot of it applies also to the writing. All right. You can link them, and you could have a supported opinion speaking question that also they have to do writing for. All right. One small note as an examiner: when the student walks in, they get an introductory question that is not marked. All right. It's an icebreaker. And it's usually something like, tell us a little bit about yourself. Please do not have them rehearse the answer to this question. As I mentioned in my previous webinar, I've had a batch of students from the same school give me the exact same memorized introduction. They all miraculously played rugby or whatever. So this is not, we are not testing them at this level, at this question. We are not interested in hearing structures or a great command or fluency. And then, if they're fluent in the introduction and then everything falls apart, this also goes for the writing. Don't have them memorize word for word. Well, they just have to rephrase the rubric. If they're memorizing things and then suddenly their English falls apart, every examiner can see through that, right? And it's annoying. It's kind of insults the intelligence. The purpose of the icebreaker for examiners is often to get maybe like to say, oh, so if somebody says, I played piano for 15 years or 10 years or whatever, and I'm really interested in it and I want to become a pianist, well, then we may ask them the question that has to do with music. So it's very important they don't lie. All right? Just tell them to be as natural as they can. All right? Examiners don't bite. We're very happy to rephrase questions. And there's something that is not common in other exams that your kids need to know about. Up to 3 times, they can ask for another question. Because sometimes a story will say something like, tell us about a time that you received a gift that you didn't like. And perhaps that student at that point cannot think of one and maybe has never received. Look, one option is to lie, and it's a very good option for the story, not for the introduction. So to make up a situation, oh, my grandmother gave me this sweater and it was like multicolored and I didn't want to hurt her feelings, etc. If your student doesn't have that ability to come up spontaneously with an imaginary answer to the narrative, he can say, I'm sorry, I've never actually received a present that I didn't like. Could I please have another question? And this is fine. The examiners are instructed to give students up to 3 alternate questions. Now, having said that, I strongly recommend they don't use up those 3. Like, only to use that as a last alternative, and not to use it in the supported opinions. It's most useful in the description if it's really something that they can't describe, and in the narrations. All right. But only as a last resort, because it does show a weakness in the student. And if he does it twice in a row, that shows a distinct weakness, in an ability to address questions. Make sure they're on topic, which is also very important in the writing. As I said, both speaking and writing are the production of language, so there's a lot of similar advice for both of these parts of the exam. What else? Politeness. I talked about that on my last webinar. Make sure your students are trained in the class to say pardon, not what? This what? It's rude and a bit, I'm taken aback when I hear this kind of responses. They are definitely allowed to say something like, I don't understand what this word means. Could you explain that to me? We are very willing as examiners to explain unknown words, or even to rephrase the question. Okay, the point here is to hear them produce the language, not to confuse them with difficult questions, right? And they will understand that when they go in. It's generally a friendly event. Generally, students come out really happy, saying, "Wow, it's over. That was so easy. That was so nice." It's the most pleasant part of the examination, right? So before I say what distinguishes, let's go one last time over the revisions. It's shorter, it's friendlier to a younger audience. There are introductions. Here is a situation. I think that's mostly it. All right. What distinguishes the MSU-CELC as an examination? Okay, first of all, that MSU is a renowned university. I always knew it through Malcolm X. He was tied to this very strongly to this university. He spoke there often. The administration by two of Greece's strong colleges, Juri and Anatolia. The friendliness of the examiners, they're known for that. And the fact that there's no vocabulary section, use of English, vocabulary test the passage. I think I've gone over that enough in the actual sections when I talked about them. The practice test book that I've written with 7 practice tests, I always like making my tests a touch harder than the real thing. I don't see what the point is of making them easier. I like to train students to be more alert and aware. So you should bear that in mind, that the marks, especially in the beginning, are not an accurate reflection of what they would score in the test. I often find that students who have done my test books score higher on the actual exam than they did in the practice tests. Model writing samples with key phrases are provided, so this gives students something to look at. I highly suggest they do not read them before they do the writing, because then they're tempted to just mimic exactly what they read. But then afterwards, it's a very good thing to do. And before the exam, it's a very good idea to study through just keep on reading them and trying to assimilate some of the phrases and the syntax. There's a glossary with Greek translations so that kids can just study on their own as a teacher. You don't have to address that at all. It's just for your students' convenience. There is software. So of course there's interactive whiteboard software, which is very helpful for school teachers. There's functions that you can use there for the audio, the glossary. It's for convenience. It's for tech. It's for everything. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope I covered everything, but I'm very, very open to answering any questions that you might have about this or anything else. Terry, are you here? You want to take it over?
I'm here. All right, thank you very much, Sarah. That was a very good presentation, very informative. So now we can start the question and answer section. There was a question earlier on in the talk. So I think Kyriaki Kolakita, if you can maybe answer that question, ask that question again, but check it out. Let me start this fancy question and answer mode. All right. So let's see. Question number 1.
Terry, can you answer that, please?
Is the interactive whiteboard material for sale, or is it only provided to schools? The interactive whiteboard material is for sale. So the best thing to do is to get in touch with us either through email, through your local rep, or by giving us a call at 210-962-6166, and we'll be happy to help you, Rula. That was the first question for me of all these webinars. That was very nice. More questions, please. Everybody, I can see. Let's see. Let's go back to the question then.
Tension near the beginning, but I couldn't. I started reading it and then I got off track. Can you find that?
So Kyriaki said, so why have them do 4 passages instead of investing in them using their reading skills? Why should they struggle with time? Since you are taking out a revised format, wasn't this one of the things you have had complaints with?
Okay.
Are you with us? I'll leave that question for you, Sarah.
Yeah, can I actually see the question in any way? Is it up there
Sure.
on the board?
It is
Yeah,
in the chat box.
why have them do 4 passages? Instead of investing in them using their reading skills, why should they struggle with time? Since you are taking out a revised format, wasn't this one of the things you had complained? Okay, first of all, to be completely clear, I am not MSU. I am a writer for all of the examinations. I support all of them equally. I don't have a preference. I do have experience as an MSU examiners, but I think the general philosophy of the English examinations from America as opposed to Britain is faster and simpler. It's the same philosophy that follows why you hear the listening only once, because in real life, you don't hear it twice, right? If you're standing at a train station asking for directions, you cannot repeat the conversation. I mean, you can ask them for clarification, but kids need to up their skills of fast skimming, scanning, listening techniques. So what they've done is they've made those 4 passages significantly shorter. Like I would say 20 to 30% shorter. So time is still an issue for people who are not familiar with B2 examinations. But let's say you have a person retaking it from the old format to the new, they'll see a huge difference. All right, it's nothing to do with that. So but also be aware that when you have less time to do a passage, or if you only hear it once, it's far more straightforward. The examiners are very aware of the fact that they're asking you to do something quickly. So whereas a Cambridge passage will be far more dense and will need the student to pore over it and to get the innuendo and to see the double shades of meaning and et cetera, et cetera. There's nothing like that on the MSU, and I would say on the other American exams as well. It's far more straightforward. Look at the question, look at the answer, identify where it is, and just answer it. Because of the complaints, they've shortened the actual length, and they've made it far friendlier. Like, I mean, the blog, have a look at their sample. They have it online, and you'll see it's far more approachable. And I think that an average B2 student, not a strong one, won't have an issue. It's just a tip of mind because they're used to having all the time in the world when they have a passage and delving into it and getting the meaning, because most course books, and I'm glad about that, are geared more towards Cambridge type exercises as to get students up to a higher level. It's just that in the actual testing environment, time is an issue, but not like one that's like, all right. So I hope that answered your question, Kiriaki. If you want to add anything else, just to make a note here, I do check into our Hamilton House Facebooks, both the Hamilton House Greece and the Hamilton House Publishers. So if you have other further questions, you could even put them as comments and I will see them. So anyways, yes, there are 2 examiners. One of them does all the talking and the other one does the marking. But they both address they both are looking and smiling at the candidate. And I think it's nice, but although it's not necessary, when the candidate does, kind of look at both, because it's more interactive. Why should we choose the MSU exams and not the ECC, ECPE ones? I'm not recommending one over the other. All right. I'm definitely not saying do one and not do the other. I did say what distinguished the MSU, as I do with what makes it different, not what makes it better. All right. No, can I just stay on that question for 1 second? The differences in the MSU are that there are no multiple choice vocabulary questions, and that makes it friendlier for students. That's the only thing I wanted to say about a difference. But I'm not saying better or worse. All right. In reading, should students read the MC questions first and then the passage, or the other way around? Now, this is a very good question and something that I find depends on the individual student. I generally recommend, if they're fast enough, just to skim through to get a general gist of get the gist of the passage, and then do the questions and identify exactly where the answer is. They definitely don't have time to, read the passage, get to know it well, figure it out, and then answer the questions. But just reading the questions blind, out of context, cold, I don't think that's very effective. They should at least have gone over the passage quickly. So skimming for gist, very important skill to learn. Very important. And you can do that in your course books. You can give them like 10 seconds to skim the first paragraph and say, okay, what's it basically about? All right. Anything else?
Yeah, actually, we have a question on our Facebook stream from Carrie Tierney. She asks, can the students use the first person singular in the second and third paragraphs in the writing? Is it formal enough?
Generally speaking, using the first person singular for me is redundant because it's obviously your opinion. But since MSU asks for illustrations, examples, and etc., absolutely yes. All right. So if it's about, again, I'm going back to that one topic about compulsory subjects, it's definitely as a supporting point, they can say, last year I was forced to take algebra at a high level, which for me was a waste of time because of blah, blah, blah. So this is a B2 level as well, but generally speaking, MSU asks for support with personal examples as well. Okay, so yes, you can use the I. Don't have them say, I think this, I want this, I believe this. That's just too much I. All right, but yes, it is formal.
Okay. Well, since I don't see any more questions, I see lots of thank yous, thank yous, thank yous.
You're welcome, you're welcome, you're welcome.
Excellent. I couldn't have said it any better myself. So thank you very much, everybody. Sarah, again, thank you very much for this wonderful.
Very welcome. Stay safe. It's a very, very, unstable environment out there. So give your students the skills they need to get through this, to learn English, to feel safe and confident in their own skills. And good luck with everything. And I'll see you soon. All right. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye. Bye-bye.